Mr. Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks for the blessings which have been bestowed on us. Laying aside all personal interests, we acknowledge the King and pray for guidance in our deliberations, that we may conduct the affairs of this House with wisdom, justice, mercy and humility for the welfare and peace of New Zealand. Amen.
A petition has been delivered to the Clerk for presentation.
Petition of Maori and Davis requesting that the House urge Te Puking as Board to remove the Chief Executive, urge the Government to remove Te Puking as Board and commission an independent public inquiry into Te Pukinga's performance.
That petition stands referred to the Petitions Committee. Papers have been delivered to the Clerk for presentation.
Report of the Intelligence and Security Committee on the activities of the Intelligence and Security Committee in 2022. Te Akawhai Ora Māori Health Authority, Statement of Performance Expectations 2022 to 23.
Those papers are published under the authority of the House. Select Committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's Financial Stability Report, May 2003. Report of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee on the report of the Controller and Auditor General, results of our 2019-20 audits of port companies.
The reports are set down for consideration. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of a bill.
Appropriation 2022-23 Supplementary Estimates Bill, introduction.
That bill is set down for first reading.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I present the Supplementary Estimates of Appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2023.
That paper is published under the authority of the House. The House now comes to the delivery of the budget.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I present the 2023 Budget Speech, the Budget at a Glance 2023, the Wellbeing Budget 2023, including reports on the fiscal strategy on child poverty and on the summary of initiatives, the Budget Economic and Fiscal Update 2023, and the estimates of appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2024.
Those papers are published under the authority of the House.
And you.
Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill, introduction.
The Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill is set down for first reading immediately.
Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand Labour.
62 votes in favour.
New Zealand National.
34 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
10 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand.
9 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
Votes in favour.
Dr Elizabeth Kirikiri.
1 vote in favour.
Honourable Mika Whaitiri.
1 vote in favour.
The ayes are 75, the noes are 44. The bill will be read a first time.
Appropriations 2023-24 Estimates Bill, first reading.
The Appropriations 2023-24 Estimates Bill is set down for second reading immediately.
Mr.
The
Speaker,
Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, just before I begin my formal budget speech, as the Member of Parliament for Wellington Central, I want to make a specific acknowledgement of the victims of the Loafers Lodge fire and all those who have been affected by it. I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the House in saying our araha and thoughts are with all of those who have been affected. Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to present New Zealand's 5th wellbeing budget. As in each of these budgets, we have taken into account the wellbeing of our people, the strength of our communities, the health of our environment, alongside the performance of our economy and finances. In doing so, we are striking a balance between supporting our people now with the pressure of cost of living and investing in future jobs and economic security. The backdrop to Budget 2023 is challenging. It is hard to remember a time in New Zealand's history where there have been so many challenges to our economic, environmental and social systems in such a short period of time. Individuals, families, businesses and communities are feeling the impact of global economic and political turbulence, high inflation, the lingering hangover of the COVID emergency and the impacts of climate change through more frequent and intense weather events. Cost of living pressures are being felt across our communities. Budget 2023 responds to those pressures in a targeted and responsible way, building on what we have done over recent years and in a way that will not exacerbate inflation. There is a particular focus on parents and young families, including the expansion of 20 hours ECE support to 2-year-olds. Free public transport for children and half price for under 25s and the scrapping of the $5 prescription charge for all New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, we are also making a significant commitment to support the recovery and rebuild of those regions affected by severe weather events earlier in the year. This was an unwelcome and unplanned for series of events, but our careful financial management and the reprioritisation program led by the Prime Minister has allowed us to reallocate resources and meet the government's future contributions through the budget allowances. We are on track to return to surplus within the forecast period. Our net debt will peak at 22% of GDP, well below the ceiling set in our fiscal rules. And inflation is forecast to return to around 3% by the end of 2024. Budget 2023 also looks ahead. We are very much focused on doing the basics well, with significant investment in education, health and housing. These areas are the bedrock of opportunity for each and every New Zealander. At the same time, we are improving the resilience of New Zealand's critical infrastructure and investing in a more productive, higher wage, lower emissions economy, including through research and technology. The budget strikes the critical balance between the support required today and the investment needs of the future. We have carefully cut our cloth as the emergency spending in response to COVID activities declines and we move to a more fiscally sustainable path. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand has withstood many shocks in recent memory and our well-being has generally held up well. However, absorbing these shocks has affected our wealth, and we need to rebuild our resilience to the future challenges we know will come. The Treasury's first wellbeing report, Te Tai Waiora, provided a broad perspective on the range of things that matter for wellbeing. It highlighted that New Zealand is a good place to live in many ways, and that many aspects of our life have improved over the past 20 years. We enjoy cleaner air, longer life expectancy and higher incomes. However, New Zealand faces wellbeing challenges, particularly around mental wellbeing, education and housing quality and affordability. And these challenges are on average felt more strongly by our younger people. These issues are long-standing and they have not lost their urgency, and they continue to be reflected in our wellbeing objectives. We are in a good position to meet these challenges. The New Zealand economy emerged from COVID-19 well, with modest growth anticipated over 2023. Our economic recovery from COVID is in the top 10 of OECD nations. At 3.4%, the Household Labour Force Survey measure of unemployment is currently equal or lower than any period prior to 2020. New Zealand continues to have some of the lowest public debt in the world, and Budget 2023 is another step in the direction of bringing core Crown expenses as a percentage of GDP back towards pre-pandemic levels. We remain committed to returning the Obergau to surplus within the forecast period and keeping net debt below the ceiling of 30% of GDP. Mr Speaker, in the context of our wellbeing approach, the Government remains committed to improving child wellbeing. The latest figures released by Stats New Zealand show that 8 out of 9 of the child poverty measures have seen a significant reduction since the baseline year of 2018. Over the last 2 years, child poverty rates on the measures we have comparable data for are the lowest they have been since we started measuring, and rates have almost halved on 2 of them. This is a testament to the comprehensive package of investments that we have put in place to support families over several years and are continuing to do so in Budget 2023. Mr Speaker, it is worth noting our wellbeing budget approach applies a gender budgeting lens into Budget 2023, expanding on last year's pilot program. This year it looked at 27 initiatives across 15 agencies. And this lens has influenced the range of investments, including in the cost of living space, and has been an important and useful indicator of whether the budget is meeting our wellbeing objectives. For example, we know that on average, women have lower KiwiSaver balances and retirement income than men. Time out of the workforce for parenting responsibilities is one key reason for this. The Government is addressing this through Budget 2023. Settle down, Mr Bishop. The Government is addressing this through Budget 2023 by introducing a matching employer contribution to paid parental leave recipients. Mr Speaker, this recognises the unpaid nature of childcare and supports savings for retirement. It is a small but significant boost to lifetime income for many women. Mr Speaker, Budget 2023 builds on the support we have been providing to New Zealanders in the face of cost of living pressures. The global inflation crisis, which has seen prices rise faster and stay higher for longer, is causing strain for many people, particularly for low and middle income households and those with young children. The Government has already delivered significant support through the cost of living payment, reductions to fuel excise duty and road user charges, and half-price public transport. In addition, since 1 April, more than 1.4 million New Zealanders have benefited from increased assistance to help with the cost of living, including people receiving a main benefit, students and superannuitants. This includes 354,000 low-income New Zealanders who we've supported through a $311 million investment from this budget to support main benefits to increase by 7.2% in line with inflation. Budget 2023 focuses on targeted cost of living support that will not exacerbate inflation pressures, while also laying the foundation for long-term benefits, including educational and health outcomes and meeting our climate change goals. Mr Speaker, we know that the first 5 years of a child's life are extremely important for development and learning. We also know that right now the cost of access to early childhood education and childcare can be a barrier for parents and caregivers wanting to enter or remain in employment, education or training. Parents should not have to forego ECE for their children because of the cost. Budget 2023 responds to this by investing $1.8 billion in early childhood education. Mr. Speaker, the flagship of this package is extending the 20 hours support to include 2-year-olds, adding to the existing 3 to 5-year-olds. Based on average costs in 2023, families who were not previously receiving childcare subsidies would save an estimated $133.20 per week if their child attends ECE for at least 20 hours a week. Alongside this, we are providing further support for pay parity for ECE teachers, giving an average 5.3% funding increase for ECE providers and providing a sustainability grant for Play Centre Aotearoa. We are also expanding eligibility criteria for flexible childcare assistance for low to middle income working families, extending the duration period and indexing the rates of flexible childcare assistance to the CPI, which will support parents with informal care costs when formal care is not available. Altogether, this package means we will relieve the pressure of an essential cost while also ensuring that those who provide it are adequately funded to meet increases in demand and pay for those who work in the sector appropriately. It is a substantial investment in our children, in our parents, in our teachers and caregivers, and ultimately in New Zealand's future. In addition to these investments in our education system, Budget 2023 extends the Ngātini Whetū pilot run under the whānau ora umbrella. This focuses on ensuring that Pepe and Tamariki are supported specifically in their first 1,000 days alongside broader whānau aspirations. Mr. Speaker, for some New Zealanders, prescription costs are a barrier to receiving the health care they need and lead to trade-offs with the purchase of other necessities. We know that in the 2021-22 financial year, 135,000 people did not collect their prescription because of the cost. I am pleased to say that from the 1st of July this year, we are removing the $5 prescription co-payment for all New Zealanders. This will reduce inequality in our health system and lead to better health outcomes for everyone. We are also extending the Ka Ora Ka Ako Healthy School Lunch program. Rising inflation on household incomes puts pressure on food security for families in whānau, and we know that learning is affected if children are hungry. Through Budget 2023, $325 million has been invested to continue this program until the end of 2024. For families with 2 children, it is estimated the scheme saves on average $60 per week. Mr. Speaker, access to affordable transport is a cost pressure for many New Zealanders. The government has previously created the Community Connect public transport concession that provides half-price public transport to community service card holders. Today, I can announce that this has been extended to all under 25-year-olds and users of total mobility services. I know that this commitment will be particularly welcomed by tertiary students who are often reliant on public transport. Mr. Speaker, the government has decided to go further in order to support families. Budget 2023 will fund free public transport for children aged 5 to 12 years. Mr. Speaker, this investment of $327.4 million will help passengers meet the costs of public transport, encourage increased use, and also support New Zealand to achieve its climate change goals. It is another example of where we can both relieve the cost of living pressures for some families and contribute to our emissions reductions. We can also do this through household energy bills. A warm, dry home is key to improved health and wellbeing outcomes for New Zealanders. Homes that lack adequate insulation and efficient heating lead to higher energy bills and poor health outcomes. That's why Budget 2023 is funding the extension and expansion of the Warmer Kiwi Homes program. This will see a further 100,000 insulation and heating installations, as well as the installation of efficient hot water heaters and LED lights. Warmer Kiwi Homes is estimated to have reduced electricity use by 16% on average over the winter months, as well as cutting the risk of respiratory illness and making homes drier and more comfortable. It is a true wellbeing policy. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 funds the critical services that New Zealanders rely on day to day, including health, education, welfare and housing. It is vital that we continue to deliver these basic services well, and there are major challenges to doing so in a high inflation environment. Funding these services must come first in a constrained spending environment. We're investing significantly to maintain and enhance public services, and this includes the public sector pay adjustment to settle a large number of pay claims across the core public service. Education is critical to the success of New Zealand now and in the future. The Budget 2023 package provides $3.6 billion operating and $1.3 billion capital towards education, including tertiary education. As well as our flagship ECE package, there are a number of other key education investments. A cornerstone is investing in a fit-for-purpose school property portfolio that reflects the ongoing needs of students and teachers. In Budget 2023, the Government is providing an additional 6,000 student places to the school network and 4 new schools. This is in addition to $147 million to modify school buildings with automatic doors, lifts and bathroom refits to support the needs of students. We're also investing significant new funding to the ongoing Christchurch Schools Rebuild program and to deliver property improvements to 175 more small, isolated schools across New Zealand. $21.9 million operating and $112.5 million capital will be invested to expand Maori medium education infrastructure across Kura, which will support the Government's objectives of 30% Akonga Māori learning in these environments by 2040. Mr Speaker, the higher costs facing our education system has been recognised through an increase of $233.9 million for schools operational grants and a $521 million increase for tertiary tuition and training subsidies. That increase is the biggest for 20 years. Mr Speaker, these are on top of the $260 million for ECE providers mentioned earlier. The overall investment of $1 billion will help ensure education providers are resourced to deliver quality educational outcomes across the entire system. Among other education initiatives, a highlight is the further extension of the Apprenticeship Boost program through to 31 December 2024. This program was introduced during COVID to ensure there are skilled workers for key industries and that apprentices do not miss out on completing their qualification. This new investment is estimated to allow 30,000 apprentices to start or continue to receive support. Mr Speaker, we recognise the importance of work done to support the vulnerable in our community. The Community Connectors program provided an important service to help individuals, families and whānau navigate and access government support throughout COVID-19. Given its success, we are funding 100 Community Connectors for a further 2 years. We also know that regions affected by the recent weather events are in particular need of support. So we are providing funding for an additional 65 Community Connectors to be based in these regions. Mr Speaker, through Budget 2023, we are delivering on our manifesto commitment to permanently reinstate the training incentive allowance to support sole parents, disabled people and their carers to study. Disabled people will benefit from Budget 2023 with an additional $864 million provided to Whaikaha, the Ministry for Disabled People, to fund increasing demand and inflationary pressures for disability support services. We are also working to end the discriminatory minimum wage exemption for around 800 disabled employees in New Zealand by mid-2025. This means they will no longer be paid less than the minimum wage for their work. Budget 2023 will continue funding to deliver financial advice and debt services across New Zealand for those who are struggling financially. Funding of $29.2 million will help providers meet demand for one-to-one services and peer-led support for people with complex needs. We are also providing further funding for the Food Secure Communities initiative to support food rescue and food security, including in cyclone-affected regions. Mr Speaker, the Government is undertaking a significant reform of the health system. To back this up, last budget we moved to a multi-year funding approach to plan better and ensure more consistent health services. Relying on the annual budget cycle for funding made it difficult to address long-term challenges in the health system. Budget 2022 provided the largest health investment ever, with $11.1 billion in new funding to put our healthcare on a sustainable financial footing, including a $1.3 billion increase for the 2023-24 year to help address historic and future cost pressures. 1 year on from the establishment of Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand and Te Aka Whai Ora, we are focused on supporting and growing the health workforce, increasing capacity in health care and expanding GP services. The investment we have made means over $1 billion has been spent on increasing wages and staff numbers this financial year, including $63 million for safe staffing levels that will allow for an additional 500 new nurses. As the Minister of Health has previously indicated, she is prioritising resources to frontline services where they are needed, such as nearly $100 million towards initiatives to deal with the winter peak, $118 million to reduce waiting lists, and $20 million to improve immunisation programs and screening coverage for Maori and Pacific peoples. These are just a few of the programs of Te Whatu Ora and Te Aka Whai Ora. From 2024, we intend to move health budgets to a 3-year funding cycle to align with the New Zealand health plans. Mr Speaker, last budget we instituted an integrated and long-term funding approach for our work in the justice and law and order area. Based on an agreed cross-agency plan, agencies have the certainty of a 3-year pool of funding and the flexibility to move resources around to meet emerging needs. This approach is already proving successful, with a fast-tracking of an early intervention program targeting recidivist young offenders in Hamilton, Auckland and Christchurch. Less than 30% of those in the program have been referred again after the intervention. Part of the long-term funding is a commitment to keep police resources in line with the population. In addition to achieving the government's goal of 1,800 extra police, there are resources available to keep the ratio of 1 officer to every 480 people. This is a significant improvement on the ratio of 1 officer to every 544 people that we inherited in 2017. Mr Speaker, in line with our wellbeing objectives, this budget continues to support Maori and Pacific economic, social and environmental aspirations. A critical focus is in housing. In Budget 2023, the Government is making sizable investments in key infrastructure, such as an extra $23 million for the Te Ringa Hapai Whenua Fund to further invest in infrastructure on whenua Māori, and $200 million to increase the supply of Māori housing and to repair properties. In addition, targeted funding is provided for repairs to whānau-owned homes in cyclone-affected areas. We are continuing to foster the growth of Māori and Pacific languages, culture and identity. To deliver the Pacific Languages Strategy, we will improve access to Pacific language learning resources with a $13 million commitment and add to our already significant Te Reo Māori revitalisation with a $10 million boost. Key Māori cultural institutions will receive investments to maintain and grow their impact. This includes Te Matatini, who will receive $34 million over the next 2 years. We are also providing a further $18 million to support recognition and community involvement in the Matariki public holiday. Our investments in education and whānau illustrate our commitment to laying the strongest foundations for our tamariki and supporting households experiencing cost of living pressures. To strengthen Māori education, we are boosting teacher supply, in addition to investing significantly in the infrastructure of Māori medium schools, as I mentioned earlier. To ensure families continue to receive the support they need, Budget 2023 increases investment in whānau ora and further expands its services in addition to the funding for Ngātini Whetū. We know that Pacific peoples are more likely than other New Zealanders to experience unemployment or low employment, and that is why Budget 2023 is investing almost $13 million to implement the Pacific Employment Action Plan. This will bring Pacific workers into new employment and training opportunities and deliver the Pacific Wellbeing Strategy, which will fund initiatives that grow the capability of the workforce. Mr Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic and recent extreme weather events earlier this year show just how important it is to improve our resilience as a country. Severe weather in the North Island at the start of the year caused widespread disruption and damage to people's lives and properties, the scale of which will be felt for some time. In the immediate aftermath of the events, we made urgent investments to support the response, including direct financial support to businesses and growers, repairing damaged infrastructure, and providing temporary housing and other assistance to affected families. In advance of the budget, more than $800 million had been allocated to this emergency response work. We are building on our immediate response by investing a total of $941 million of operating and $195 million of capital expenditure in Budget 2023 to support the recovery and invest in regional resilience. This package will help local government improve flood protection, invest a further $475 million to rebuild our railways, state highways, bridges and local roads, repair damaged schools, rebuild damaged whānau homes and ensure the provision of temporary accommodation for dislocated families. The package also invests in the provision of health and mental wellbeing services, including the extension of mana ake. This package also maintains our support for those people made vulnerable by these events. This includes $11 million to top up community support funds and reduce food insecurity, funding to help businesses retain staff and displaced workers to find new employment, and help connect individuals in whānau to the support that they need. Budget 2023 also continues our support for the recovery of the primary sector and rural communities, with an additional $30 million committed to address time-sensitive health and safety and animal welfare challenges. This is all part of the rolling maul of support for weather-affected regions. There's further work underway on regional and sectoral strategies and on support for severely affected properties. We are committed to a regionally led recovery where local voices are central to government decisions. We are supporting regional recovery structures to coordinate recovery, as well as the Cyclone Gabrielle Recovery Task Force and local public service coordination for each affected region. Mr. Speaker, while we are focused on supporting families with the immediate pressures and protecting our vital services, we also need to deliver on our plan to build a high-wage, low-emissions economy to ensure security for all New Zealanders. Budget 2023 investments are the building blocks for addressing New Zealand's long-standing challenges, and they lay the groundwork for taking advantage of opportunities to build a sustainable, globally competitive economy. Mr. Speaker, the government has taken significant steps to address New Zealand's infrastructure deficit. We have committed $71 billion of infrastructure investment over the next 5 years, in addition to the $45 billion we have spent on infrastructure in the past 5 years. This is the funding that builds our schools, our hospitals, public housing, rail and road networks. In the last term of government, we set up the Infrastructure Commission Te Waihanga, which developed the New Zealand Infrastructure Strategy, identifying the challenges New Zealand is facing over the next 30 years. We know we need to change how we think about infrastructure planning and resourcing. Alongside this budget, we have released our Infrastructure Action Plan, which supports our response to the strategy and which is crucial to continuing to deliver the infrastructure transformation required while providing certainty to the construction sector. As the plan lays out, we need to future-proof our infrastructure for New Zealand's growing and changing population, climate change events, and to make use of developing technology available to us. The North Island weather events added a level of urgency to our infrastructure investment and planning and highlighted the importance of resilience in the face of climate change and increasing extreme weather events. Today, I am announcing a major change in how we address our infrastructure deficit and build a more resilient nation. Through Budget 2023, we are investing $6 billion in the initial phase of a National Resilience Plan. This will support medium and long-term infrastructure investment and focus in the first instance on building back better from the recent weather events. The initial focus of investments will likely be on road, rail and local resilience, as well as telecommunications and electricity investment. As indicated at Budget 2022, the change to the fiscal rules means we can use our balance sheet more effectively to support long-term productive investments such as this program. For too long, governments have kicked the can down the road when it comes to investing in resilient and essential infrastructure investment. Today, we embark on the long-term nation building that I believe a responsible government must do. Mr. Speaker, we continue to invest significant resources into public housing through Kāinga Ora and community housing providers. I am proud to say that Budget 2023 provides funding to deliver an additional 3,000 new public homes by June 2025. The turnaround in the building of public housing is one of the signature achievements of our Labor government. So far, we have delivered 11,813 more public homes and 4,131 transitional homes. There are close to 4,500 public housing places currently under construction. Budget 2023 also covers the increased costs caused by inflation for finishing that work. New Zealand's national rail network is critical for passenger transportation and freight services. In Budget 2023, we are providing $369.2 million to continue to develop a resilient and reliable national rail service. To address cost increases, the government is investing $9.4 million operating and $197 million capital in the Auckland City Rail Link project to provide a key link within Auckland's public transport network. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 includes significant investments in research and development to deliver on the future pathways reforms of our public research system. This is consistent with our commitment to increase research and development expenditure to 2% of GDP. The centrepiece of this investment is the establishment of 3 new multi-institution research hubs focused on health and wellbeing, oceans, climate and hazards, and advanced manufacturing, biotech and energy. This $451 million investment will drive innovation, collaboration and export earning potential. It is an exciting development, bringing public and private sector together to solve significant problems and foster growth of our science sector. Backing this up is investment in research fellowships and an applied doctoral training scheme for more than 260 people to fill skill gaps and grow a sustainable research system. Budget 2023 continues our investment in industries that will drive us towards a high-wage, low-emissions economy. We will invest a further $74.7 million in our industry transformation plans. This includes $30 million for the horticulture technology sector, which we will assist to develop more productive ways of operating, including for those affected by the cyclone. The budget also provides new investment in the digital and tourism transformation plans. Mr. Speaker, the game development sector is a growing part of our economy. In 2022, it contributed $400 million to GDP and is the source of high-value jobs that are driving export returns. The sector is an internationally competitive one, and we are at risk of losing our talent overseas. Budget 2023 includes $160 million to establish a 20% rebate for video game developers, which will help grow and protect New Zealand's domestic game development sector. Individual game developers will be able to access up to $3 million as part of the scheme. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2022, the government established the Climate Emergency Response Fund as a permanent feature of the annual budget process. The SERF supports New Zealand's climate change objectives by providing dedicated funding to initiatives that support the transition to a low emissions and climate resilient economy. In Budget 2023, there is a $1.9 billion SERF package to further reduce emissions and enhance our resilience to climate change. As already noted, we are expanding the Warmer Kiwi Homes program and reducing the cost of public transport for hundreds of thousands of Kiwis. In addition, we are expanding our electric vehicle infrastructure. In many areas of New Zealand, especially in rural communities, there is not the charging infrastructure to support the exceptional growth in the number of EVs. Budget 2023 will begin the rollout of our EV charging strategy, which will see charging hubs every 150 to 200 kilometres on main highways and public charging at community facilities for all settlements of more than 2,000 people. Mr. Speaker, funding is also being made available to support the purchase of low-emission heavy vehicles like trucks and buses to build on the success of the Clean Car Discount and the Low Emissions Transport Fund. It is estimated that this will see 500 low-emission heavy vehicles on the road, saving operators fuel costs by up to 75%. The SERF is also supporting the $300 million capital injection to the New Zealand Green Investment Fund, a renewable energy system for the Chatham Islands, and funding for community-scale renewable energy generation and storage. The The size and makeup of the Budget 2023 SURF package reflects the scale and breadth of the challenge ahead of us, while prioritising resources to where they can have the greatest impact. Mr. Speaker, putting Budget 2023 together has required challenging trade-offs and decisions. Along with the investments we need to make to help reduce the pressure of the cost of living, delivering public services and our resilience and recovery, we also have to move to a more sustainable fiscal position. The last few budgets have supported our response to and our recovery from the impact of COVID. This has necessitated significant spending, which is now reducing. The forecasts in this budget see core Crown spending as a percentage of GDP, tracking back to just above the long-term average at 31.5% by the end of the forecast period. We need to move carefully in reducing spending so we don't undermine the investments we have made, but this direction of travel is important for the long-term prosperity of New Zealand. Persistent inflation has meant that the costs of delivering government services have increased, and it has been necessary to slightly increase the operating allowances set at the budget policy statement for this year and in out years in order to meet these costs, including the cyclone and flood recovery, rather than cut essential services. The Treasury is forecasting inflation will decline across the next few years to 3.3% in 2024 and 2.6% in 2025. Even with the investments that we have made, New Zealand continues to have some of the lowest public debt in the world. New Zealand's net debt is forecast to peak at 22% of GDP next year before reducing to 18.4% at the end of the forecast period. This compares well using IMF measures with the likes of Australia at 36%, the United Kingdom at 95% and the United States at 96%. Mr. Speaker, anchored by the fiscal rules that we set at Budget 2022, we are on track to return the Obergau to surplus within the forecast period, although 1 year later than was forecast at the half-year update. The costs of responding to the cyclone and more persistent inflation are the cause of this, but it is worth bearing in mind that this will be the same length of time that the previous government took to return to surplus after the global financial crisis. Average deficits as a share of GDP remain lower than in the wake of the GFC. Our prudent fiscal strategy of running surpluses and reducing net debt before COVID meant that we had a stronger starting position than other countries. It meant we could use our balance sheet to protect lives and livelihoods during the pandemic. This has helped prevent a deep and long-lasting recession, and Treasury is in fact forecasting that the economy will not now go into recession. New Zealand's fiscal position remains strong, and the fiscal forecast stronger than expected, even in the face of increasing costs of delivering core government services and the recent weather disasters. Mr. Speaker, in total $4 billion in savings and reprioritisations have been achieved to offset new spending this budget. We will approach future budgets with the same restraint to ensure a sure footing for our public finances for generations to come. As they were at this budget, ministers will be required to identify opportunities for the reprioritisation of resources and improvement of efficiencies within baselines before seeking new funding. Finding opportunities to cut back spending and to redirect funding from one activity to another helps us ensure that funding is directed to the highest value activities and that the government is focused on the issues most important to New Zealanders. Significant reprioritisation of funding has been achieved for Budget 2023, including $280 million from reducing funding no longer required for fees-free tertiary education, $385.8 million from the COVID health tagged contingency, while still leaving enough support for our COVID response this winter. Alongside Budget 2023, the government has refreshed its priorities to focus on the issues that are most important to New Zealanders. This also yielded significant savings, which we have used to offset new spending at Budget 2023. This includes $364 million from stopping the TVNZ-RNZ merger, $585.1 million from stopping the Clean Car Upgrade and social leasing trial, and $500 million from the refocused water services reform. Budget 2023 also includes tax changes that improve the integrity of our tax system by bringing the trustee tax rate in line with the top personal rate. This change will help ensure that the top marginal tax rate applies more comprehensively to individuals with income over $180,000. This approach was recommended by officials when the top income tax rate was increased. Ministers undertook to monitor the situation, and we are now acting. It is interesting to note that just 5% of trusts accounted for 78% of the income in the 2021 tax year. This change addresses a potential loophole while also making sure there is more equity in our tax system. Our total savings and revenue changes have allowed us to keep core government services running in a high inflation environment, support New Zealanders with the rising cost of living, and respond to the recent North Island weather disasters, all while ensuring we keep net debt well below its ceiling of 30% of GDP, and that we are on track to deliver an operating surplus by 25-26. That, Mr. Speaker, is a balanced fiscal strategy. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 comes at a time of considerable pressure on households, businesses, and amid international uncertainty, persistent high inflation and global supply chain issues. It is a budget that does exactly what it says on the tin: support for today and building for tomorrow. We know many New Zealanders are doing it tough right now, and we are here to support them as we have done over recent years. Doing the basics well, including providing strong investment in the services that New Zealanders rely on, has to be the priority right now. There are many things the government might like to do, or tax cuts that other parties might decide to promise. But for me, keeping our children safe, warm and dry at school has to come first. Building 3,000 more state housing places has to come first. Funding our health system for 500 more nurses has to come first. Having more police on the front line has to come first. Support for people with disabilities, older New Zealanders and the vulnerable has to come first. Mr. Speaker, these investments don't happen by chance, and they are ultimately at risk if there is not a government determined that they will be there. They happen because a government prioritises them and because we know they matter to our people. We also know that even in tough times, it is vital that we look to a better tomorrow. Our investments in our people, our businesses, our communities and our environment will guide us to that place. We are making investments in this budget that will build our nation for the future. Mr. Speaker, we are a resilient and innovative country, and one where opportunities abound. Once again, through Budget 2023, this Labour government is ensuring that each and every New Zealander can seize those opportunities and achieve their potential. Kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawanui. I commend the Wellbeing Budget 2023 to the House.
Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Christopher Luxon.
Mr. Speaker, I move that all the words after that be deleted and be replaced with, quote, "This House has no confidence in the government because it cannot manage the economy properly, has no plan to tackle the cost of living crisis, and New Zealand is going backwards." Well, Mr. Speaker, that speech and this budget is just another example of this government gaslighting the country. Because Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson are trying to tell Kiwis that they're doing a splendid job managing the economy and everything is just fine and being well managed. Well, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it is not fine. New Zealanders know it's not fine. I can tell you, I know it's not fine, and deep down, Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson knows it's not fine either. And sadly, it isn't fine, and New Zealanders know it. And the Kiwis, and there's 50% of Kiwis now who worry about money on a daily basis. They know it's not fine. The 430,000 Kiwis who have debt arrears, they know that the economy is not being well managed and things are not fine. and sadly the 20,000 Kiwi families who actually are facing a loss of their houses because their mortgages, they can't afford them anymore, they know things aren't fine as well. And what they know today is that that budget, 2023, doesn't change their situation. That's right. Because this was presented as the no-frills budget. But what we've got today is the blowout budget. Because what we've seen is a continued addiction to spending up to $137 billion, almost doubled since this government came to power. We see a huge growth in debt to $97 billion by 2026. We are seeing massive budget deficits, up $7.1 billion larger this year. And the implication of all of that is that we actually have Treasury, page 1 of the executive summary of the budget, saying interest rates are going to remain higher for longer. And just think about the pain and suffering that causes for Kiwis who have a mortgage. Every single one of them doing it tougher, harder, for longer. And not a single cent of tax relief going to hard-working Kiwis. Not nothing. So the government has said this is the bread and butter budget, but it's delivered on the backdrop of food prices up 28%. And the Prime Minister talks about bread and butter a lot, but bread is actually up 39% under Labour. And those sausage rolls that he likes to have selfies with, well, they're actually up 36% under Labour. So what we see in this budget is no ideas to drag New Zealand out of the economic hole, no ideas to tackle the underlying causes of inflation, and there are no ideas in here to stop single young people shooting off overseas and joining the 25,000 other Kiwi citizens that have booked one-way tickets to Sydney or Melbourne or London. And in fact, last night we saw a rather perverse thing happen. What we saw that Chris Hipkins has taken $10,000 of hard-working taxpayers' money, and he's actually advertising in Australia to say how much easier it is to get ahead in Australia than it is here in New Zealand. Unbelievable. And I have to say, Prime Minister, your job is to fight to keep Kiwis here at home and to create a country that can deliver a better future for them here at home. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is the blowout budget, and it's just spend more and expect Kiwis to pay for it. That's what it is. That's what we've come to expect. But I'm not surprised. You know, we've had a change of Prime Minister. He's tried to adopt some new language and some new words, but the reality of it is just the same old Labour government with the same tired, failed approach to running the economy. And this is Grant Robertson's 6th budget, but I sincerely hope, and for the sake of all New Zealanders, it has to be his last budget. Because he is totally, utterly, completely addicted to spending. Every budget he stands up and promises he's going to deliver it this time. This time I'll get better. This time I'll do better. But every time he blows it out. And that's because he's addicted to spending. And he's an addict. And as a result, he doesn't want to admit that he's got a problem. And the sad thing is that the new Prime Minister, his new boss, isn't tough enough to tell him, hey, Sunshine, we need to make an intervention here to actually get it sorted, get it back on track. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very, very simple. The New Zealand people cannot afford another 3 years of this Labour government. So, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the economy, because the forecasts in this budget make for incredibly grim reading. And the books show us that there is more economic pain on the way, and that is thanks to this government with no economic plan. Inflation is high, and the government's spending is going to make it worse. Interest rates, by their own admission, are going to be there for longer and stay higher for longer because of Grant Robertson and Chris Hipkins' reckless addiction to spending. And that will smash every single Kiwi with a mortgage up and down this country, and they're going to feel that pain. And the other thing that was obvious in the books is that unemployment is set to climb higher, and it's higher thanks to this government's economic mismanagement. Now, I want to be really clear. I want to explain to all New Zealanders, actually, how did we get here? How have Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson so badly mismanaged this economy and got us into this mess? And this is how it starts. It starts with record levels of government spending. In fact, New Zealand was the 2nd highest in the developed world on government spending. And then they took and coupled that with extraordinary monetary policy. We were the 5th highest country in the world printing cash. And then, just for good measure, they restricted immigration and shut the joint down and actually created domestic inflation. And so what happened was New Zealand got flooded with money, it popped asset prices, and it embedded domestic inflation. And that high inflation now means that we have to deal with high interest rates. It means that we deal with a shrinking economy and slowing growth for longer. That's what's happening here. That's the pattern of economic history. Those are the lessons of economics that are well known. But Mr. Speaker, I have to say, up and down this country, I visit it, go everywhere every week, and I see New Zealanders that are doing it incredibly tough. And they can gaslight as much as they want and say everything's going to be fine and it's all well managed. It's not. Because I've sat across the table from families that are in budgeting services, and they are under immense stress and anxiety within that family, trying to work out how they reconcile their own budget to pay for a big jump up in their mortgage costs. And I've talked to Kiwis who've had to sit down with their kids and stop the music lessons and stop the swimming lessons because they can't afford it anymore, because they've got to meet those mortgage repayments. And I've actually gone and sat and talked with Kiwis who actually walk the supermarket aisles looking for what they can buy, the basics that they want to be able to buy with the fixed budgets that they have and they can't, and so they go off to a food bank because that's the only place they can get some support. Well, I want to say to all those Kiwis, you've got two people to blame on this. You've got to blame Chris Hipkins and you've got to blame Grant Robertson for creating that pain and suffering for you. And I want to tell you, it doesn't have to be like this. It didn't need to be like this. This budget needed to deliver a plan for New Zealanders to grow the economy, and it didn't. This budget needed to deliver a plan to deal with the underlying drivers of inflation and not just more band-aids, but it didn't. And because we know that a strong economy is the way in which we get to lift incomes, it's how we get to deal with the cost of living, and it's how we get to afford the public services we so desperately deserve. That's why we care about this stuff. That's why we care about good, strong economic management, because that's what it enables us to do for this country. And all we get is Labor's plans to spend billions of dollars more in an inflationary bonfire. So let me be clear, Labor has blown the budget, they have blown the books, and we are going to be suffering with more pain. So, Mr. Speaker, let's talk a little bit about spending, because as I said, it actually locks in even more, the addiction to spending is even more intense than it's ever been before. And I have to say, I thought it was quite outrageous, quite incredible that this week our Prime Minister couldn't front up and actually explain how much his government is spending. Didn't know, and frankly didn't think it was probably that important. And I reckon all of that is just massive disrespect to taxpayers. Massively disrespectful, because he doesn't care, doesn't understand the numbers, and he just thinks it's his money, he just keep taking it and actually treating them like a bottomless ATM machine. And so let's work through those numbers, because we now have debt set to climb to $95 billion. And do you know what the interest bill on that is each day? $22 million. $22 million that we don't get to spend on something else. We've got government spending ballooning out to $137 billion. How much do you reckon that costs each Kiwi family? $23,000. $23,000 more each year because of government spending. $61 billion more in spending and absolutely nothing to show for it. And what have we seen from this government? We've just got a culture of excuses, and we've got a culture of addiction to spending. $1.8 billion on consultants. Yet Chris Hipkins told them, don't spend on consultants, but they kept doing it anyway. $200 million on a failed polytechnic merger. 80% of the staff want to leave, 10% less enrolments, and looking for more money with more deficits. $100 million on government advertising, $500 million for very big companies on climate subsidies, almost $500 million on a health bureaucracy that should be going to the front line, $50 million on that bike bridge. That was special, wasn't it? Wasn't that just special? The bike bridge was very special. $16 million got spent by Willie on the RNZ-TVNZ merger, and we all know how that ended. And we've got 200 comms staff now at Health New Zealand and more at the ministry. Frankly, I'd sooner have more nurses. I'd sooner have 200 nurses, not 200 comms staff. And we've got a 10-fold increase of comms staff at Michael Wood's NZTA. And then we've got the beauty, the $30 billion on light rail that just keeps sitting out there, coming one day. So let's be clear. They have blown the budget. Grant Robertson spent billions of dollars. He's blown out the books. We've got massive deficits. We've got years of deficits ahead of us based off this. He's blown out the credit card, and debt is spiralling up to $95 billion. And I have to say, Chris Hipkins doesn't get it. After 6 years in government, he doesn't get that every dollar the government spends has to be earned by someone. It has to be earned by a Kiwi who's building a business in very tough conditions at the moment. It has to be earned by a Kiwi who's working hour after hour after hour just to put food on the table. And it has to be earned by Kiwis who get up and go to work, who get the kids to school, who make the school lunches and actually want to get ahead. And they pay the taxes and he spends it and he wastes it. But rather than confront their own addiction to spending, what do? They look to blame others. And so they blame COVID. They blame COVID. And this year they're going to be spending tens of billions of dollars more than we had during the COVID period. Unbelievable, quite unbelievable. And they make any excuse to avoid actually facing up to their addiction. Now, we heard a little bit of trying to be financially responsible in that speech. You know, Grant Robertson at the end, he gave a good sort of pitch to say he's being very responsible. It's, it just goes on and on. It's quite incredible. But it was a grovelling speech. It's a bit like saying, I want the Diet Coke to go with the double quarter pounder meal. Do you know what I mean? I feel better, because I'm trying to do that. But that's what's happened here. But he's like an addict, again, who says, I don't have a problem, I'm going to be better this time, I promise. And we've had 6 of these things now, and he keeps saying I'll get better each and every time, but it hasn't been the case. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about tax, because it is incredible that under Labor, it's always a time to spend up, but it's never a time for tax relief for the good, hard-working people of New Zealand. They're happy inflation-adjusting benefits, they're happy inflation-adjusting the minimum wage, they're happy inflation-adjusting superannuation payments and departmental budgets, but they refuse to inflation-adjust tax thresholds for hard-working Kiwis getting up and going to work each day. And I'll tell you why they won't do it. It's because they've got a culture of entitlement at the heart of this government, right? They think they're entitled to your money. They think they're entitled to waste it. And as we've seen over the last few months, with all the shenanigans and all the comings and goings, they think they're entitled to rule. And that's just not the case. So sun, wind, rain or shine, Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson keep coming up with excuses about why Kiwis don't get their own money back, why they can't spend it as they see fit. And that's because they've got an addiction to spending. $1 billion more each and every week is what they're spending. $100 million extra in tax is what they're raising each and every day. And they have carried on failing to address the drivers of the cost of living crisis, failing to do anything to grow the economy, and failing to deliver meaningful tax relief for New Zealanders. And I want you to be under no illusions, because if they get back in later this year, they are going to hit Kiwis with more taxes, because the addiction to spending doesn't go away. You've got to go find the money to pay for it. And Chris Hipkins, he supported David Parker. David Parker, he noodles away on his Piketty project. He's the great man who gave us that genius idea of the Kiwi Saver tax. Remember that one? Yep. So he's down there in the basement somewhere and he's noodling away and he's dreaming up new ways for new taxes. Because they need it, right? They need it. They need to keep new taxes so they can fund that addiction that they've got going on. And that's why you won't hear Chris Hipkins rule out a capital gains tax, will you? You won't hear him rule out a wealth tax. He's still got David working away on it. You won't hear him ruling out an inheritance tax. But I want New Zealanders to be under no illusion. It's coming. It's coming. If they get back in, they're going there. Rest assured, they have to go there because they've got such an addiction to spending. They've got so many deficits and so much more debt to pay off. So I want to say to all Kiwis, if you've got a farm, watch out. If you've got a Kiwi Saver account, watch out. I want to say to you, if you're doing the right thing, trying to build up a nest egg for the future, watch out, because they're coming for you. They are coming for you, no doubt about it. Now, Mr. Speaker, this government, I think, is the gaslighting government. They are literally a gaslighting government. They have the audacity to stand up and tell you how it's all fine. Actually, everything's just great, and yet we know the reality is so different. And they will look you in the eyes and they'll say everything's great. Remember Chris Hipkins said, the healthcare system, it's got so much better the last 3 years. So much better, yep. So I want to tell you, Kiwis know it. Just saying it so doesn't make it so. That's how it works. It can't work that way. And it's just time for this government to start delivering. And Mr. Speaker, we've talked a lot about the amount of spending that this government is doing. That's one thing. But they also need to be laser focused on the quality of the spending that they're delivering and the value for money that they're delivering to the New Zealand taxpayer. Because putting aside the sheer amount of money they're spending, that's where I actually think this government has failed. It has failed to deliver outcomes and to get things done for the New Zealand people. They talk about all the activity, but they never talk about achievement. They're two different concepts. They are two different concepts. One is inputs and one is outputs. And when you're spending $1 billion a week, we have so little to show for it. So, Mr. Speaker, let's just talk about education, because that track record is atrocious. And I've got to say, who was the Minister for Education for the last 5 years? Who did that job? Oh, Chris Hipkins did that job. And now they're spending $6 billion every single year, and they've got nothing to show for it. Here we are in a developed country, and 53% of our kids do not go to school regularly. We have 100,000 chronically absent from school. Half of our kids arrive at high school not on expectations as to where they should be academically. We had half of our 15-year-olds fail the most basic maths, reading and writing tests that they need to succeed in the world. We had the PILS reading score just come through yesterday, all-time low. And now we have New Zealand out of the top 10 countries in the developed world on maths, reading and science. And I think that's just shocking. So what do you need to do? You need to focus on the basics. You need to make sure you teach your kids an hour of maths, an hour of reading, an hour of writing every single day in primary and intermediate school. That's where your education priorities should be. That's called getting outcomes. And that shouldn't be controversial, I wouldn't have thought. I wouldn't have thought that would be controversial. But the reality is Labor doesn't support it. They're not going to give it a chance. They're not focused on the basics, and they have no ideas on education. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk a little bit about health in the time that we have, because that is another story. $12.4 billion more on the health system. And yet we have absolutely nothing to show for it. Just think about it. Child immunisation rates have fallen off a cliff. Surgery waiting times, they're at record highs. Cancer treatment delays are at record highs. Specialist waiting times are at record highs. And we've got ED waiting times at record highs. Once Aisha Varel sorts out the data, we still know that we actually got record highs. But every single health performance measure in this country has gone backwards. It is utterly, utterly unacceptable. And we have spent so much money. What happened to the $2 billion on mental health? $2 billion on mental health. We have an individual spending 94 hours in an ED department waiting to get access to mental health services. So I have to say, and the only area I think actually Health New Zealand has excelled in is that they have got a lot of comm staff, and there is no shortage of comm staff at Health NZ. And your surgery won't happen on time, but if you look on the website, it just looks lovely. Again, no ideas from Labor. Now, Mr. Speaker, what is obvious from this budget is this is a government that's run out of ideas, it's run out of energy, and you've only got to look at the ministers opposite to us to see that they're dead inside. They should be getting Grant Robertson's cost of living payment from last year. That's how they are. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, despite all the challenges, I remain incredibly optimistic about the future of this great country of ours. We have a great country. We've had some big challenges. They have to deal with a really unsupportive government, but New Zealanders are extraordinary. They are determined and creative and innovative and hard-working people who want to get ahead. And we want Kiwis who get up and milk cows and go to work and get their kids to school and want the best for their family. We want to back them, and we are going to back them. Because we have incredible Kiwis who want to go out in the world and they want to beat the world, and that's fantastic. And under a national government, we're going to celebrate success, not tax it. We're not going to tax it, we're going to celebrate it. So we are going to restore the promise of New Zealand, because the promise of New Zealand was very simple. It didn't matter where you came from, it was about where you're going. That's the deal. The other deal was that if you're prepared to work hard in the best country on earth, you can get ahead and you can do well for you and your family. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have a common sense plan to do that. National, Mr. Speaker, is going to fix the economy so that we can deliver better health and education and we can restore law and order. Mr. Speaker, National is going to get New Zealand back on track.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Budget Day is a day for details, a day for plans, a day for vision. We just heard none of those things from the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the biggest blowout that we have seen today was the release of hot air from the Leader of the Opposition opposite. It is no wonder his own colleagues have started to refer to him as Captain Cliché, because after 3 years to come up with a credible plan for what National would do for New Zealanders, we heard nothing today from the Leader of the Opposition about what a national government would stand for, about what a national government would do. All we heard, as we have heard for the last 3 years, is more running down of the New Zealand economy, more running down of New Zealanders. How out of touch can you get? Mr. Speaker, this is a great day for New Zealanders. It is a great budget for Kiwi families. In a cost of living crisis, New Zealanders know that they can trust this government to have their backs and to work to ease the pressure that they face, because that is exactly what we have done today. We know that families are under the pump at the moment and that they are feeling the pressure. We know that household budgets are stretched, and the answer to that needed to be a budget that is going to support families not just now but also in the future, one that lays the foundations for a better future for New Zealand, because that is what this budget does. This budget unashamedly is about balance. It is a proudly Labour budget, about making targeted and affordable investments in the cost of living, in providing relief for New Zealanders who are needing that, and it is also about making sure that the future can be better. When I became Prime Minister in January, Mr. Speaker, I said that we would get back to basics, and that is what we have been doing. I said that we would prioritise bread and butter issues like the cost of living and investing in the public services that New Zealanders rely on every day, and that is what this budget does. I said that we would be focused on infrastructure, because this is the government of infrastructure. You might hear others talking about it, but they don't deliver. This is the government that is delivering when it comes to infrastructure. This is a government focused on creating the conditions for a growing economy. Mr. Speaker, I heard the message from New Zealanders that they thought in some areas we were doing too much, too fast, and that they wanted to see us focus on the basic issues that are affecting them right here and right now, and that is what we have been doing. The first step of that was a reprioritisation exercise, making sure that the government's energy, its resources and funding are focused on the issues that are most important to New Zealanders right now. And that meant focusing on the issues that are about supporting working families, supporting people in need, supporting our businesses and building the infrastructure that we need, and that is what we have focused on. We have saved $4 billion in this budget to reinvest in those most important priorities, to focus on the things that matter. We've continued to deliver for families, for students, for older New Zealanders. We've freed up more money and more resource so that we can focus on making sure businesses have access to the skilled labour that they need. We have continued to boost funding for the public services that New Zealanders rely on every day. And of course, I am very proud of the work that we have done in the past few months to progress our international trade agenda, including through bringing into force the free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, something that is going to be a boon for New Zealand exporters. We've continued to work on improving the pay and conditions of New Zealand workers, because on this side of the House we believe if you work hard you should be able to get ahead, and that is not the preserve only of those on the highest incomes. It should go to those who are on the lowest incomes as well. We don't call them bottom feeders on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We call them Kiwi workers, and they deserve a government that's got their backs, and that's what they have. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is focused on ensuring that New Zealanders get the support that they need and that our Kiwi kids get the best start in life possible. And I am so proud of the work that this government has been doing in that area. I'm also proud of the work that we have been doing to support older New Zealanders, increasing superannuation, one of the biggest increases to superannuations our older New Zealanders have seen in quite some time. Minimum wage increases to make sure that the Kiwis who go out to work every day and flog their guts out actually get rewarded for that and can actually make ends meet. making sure that our benefits are keeping up with the rising cost of living, providing support for students. These are all things we have invested in this year's budget. We've supported over 1 million Kiwis with the winter energy payment. Thank you, Grant Robertson, for that. We are building 3,000 new classrooms because we are not content to have kids learning in hallways and gymnasiums and libraries, which is the situation we inherited from the last government. And we are very close to putting 1,800 extra police, 1,800 extra police on the beat since we became the government. Because under the last government, the ratio of police to New Zealanders went backwards. We have been focused on keeping our communities safer by putting more cops on the beat. Because again, they might talk a big game when it comes to law and order, but they just don't deliver. And Mr. Speaker, I make no apology for the fact that under this government, our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, our firefighters, our police, our social workers, our frontline public servants have been receiving the pay increases that they deserve, which stands in stark contrast to the 9 years prior to the time that we became the government. Mr. Speaker, I want a country where if you work hard, you can get ahead. I want to live in a New Zealand where the circumstances into which you were born do not dictate the opportunities that you have in life or hold you back. I want a country where parents who work hard can provide a better life for their children, a better life than the one that they might have had through their hard work. I want to live in a New Zealand where effort and contribution are recognised and celebrated and rewarded, and where all New Zealanders get a share in the future prosperity of this country. I want to live in a country that is proud to care for the most vulnerable among us, and that is what our government is delivering. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want New Zealand to be a country that is optimistic about the future, that is outward-looking and that is confident and that is ready to take on the world, and that is what this government is committed to delivering. We are not running down the country, Mr. Speaker. We are proud of New Zealand, we are proud to be Kiwis, and we are proud to represent New Zealand on the world stage with optimism, with confidence, because we know that that is what is going to deliver a better deal and a better economy for New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, I spoke about the work that we did after I became Prime Minister around reprioritisation, and today's budget is the second step in that plan. It is the budget that sets out new focus and new direction, one that supports Kiwi families today and builds for tomorrow. The cost of living package in this budget will make a real difference for millions of New Zealanders, and it will make lives better. Mr. Speaker, one of the best investments we can make as a country is the investment we make in our children and in our tamariki. And I am so proud of the work that we are doing in early childhood education. Through this budget, 40,000 additional Kiwi kids will be eligible for 20 hours a week free early childhood education. It was a Labour government that introduced 20 hours a week free early childhood education, and it is a Labour government that is expanding it. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to addressing issues around the cost of healthcare and making sure that cost is not a barrier to Kiwis living healthy lives. The work that we are doing in this budget to scrap the $5 prescription co-charge will deliver for New Zealanders. It will help to keep people out of the health system when they don't need to be there. It will help those New Zealanders, those New Zealanders who aren't collecting their prescriptions because they can't afford to have them. And those are many of the same Kiwis that end up in our health system avoidably because cost is a barrier. The work to scrap the co-payment is in stark contrast with the last government who increased it. When the times got tough, when the going got tough, They decided to clobber New Zealanders who needed healthcare by increasing co-payments for prescriptions. Our government recognises that when times are tough, making sure Kiwis can access the healthcare they need is one of the most important things that a government can do, and that is exactly what we are doing. 135,000 New Zealanders reportedly went without collecting their prescriptions because they couldn't afford to collect them. This budget delivers for them. It delivers for elderly New Zealanders who rely on those prescriptions. It makes sure that Kiwis can access the health care that they need. Costs should not be a barrier to health care. But furthermore, there is more around the cost of living. Making sure that Kiwis can get around is also a very important priority for this government. And this year's budget extends free public transport for 5 to 12-year-olds indefinitely so that our children can get around on free public transport. And it extends half-price public transport for 13 to 25-year-olds. A real boon for our students getting around, a real saving to Kiwi families who are wanting to support their kids through their educational journey. It will make a very big difference. 1.6 million New Zealanders now eligible for free or half-price public transport. To put that into context, for the average Kiwi family with 2 kids using public transport each week, they will be saving $30 a week. That is going to make a difference. Since coming into government, we have provided cheaper public transport fares for 2.7 million New Zealanders. And we're working to reduce their power bills too, with the Warmer Kiwi Homes retrofits. 100,000 more homes warmer and drier because of the investments that we are making in this year's budget. Mr. Speaker, we know that after the last 18 months, it's been tough for New Zealand families. Treasury is now forecasting yearly economic growth of 3.2%, and they are suggesting that we could avoid a recession altogether. That's not by accident. It's by careful economic management, and I want to acknowledge the work of our Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, and his careful stewardship of our finances. Most importantly, the Treasury are forecasting that our inflation rate will get back to within the 1 to 3% target rate by the end of next year. That will help New Zealand families to get ahead. One of the most important things that we can do in this budget is to make sure that we keep the inflation rate pointing downwards, and that is what this budget has been focused on doing. But budgets need to be about more than just the here and now. They've got to also be about investing for the future. Even in a cost of living crisis, we need to be building for tomorrow and planning to come out the other side of the economic challenge that we have experienced. This budget sets aside an additional $6 billion to build community resilience. And haven't the events of the recent 6 months shown just how important that is? We want to build back better. We want to build back more resilient, and that is what we will do. We inherited a housing crisis when we became the government. And if there's one thing you know about a housing crisis, it's you don't hock off the limited affordable rental houses you have, you build some more. And that is what this government is doing. And that work is continuing with the extra 3,000 public homes that we are investing in this year's budget. I make no apology for the fact that we are spending an extra $1 billion on our health workforce. The people who go out there and deal with some of our most vulnerable New Zealanders every day, they deserve it. Our budget is backing our exporters, and it's backing new and emerging sectors of our economy, our game developers, our digital and tech sectors, because we know those are where the jobs of the future are going to be. In the 20 minutes of hot air that we just heard, nowhere did we hear any suggestion of where the National Party think the jobs of the future are going to come from. Not one new idea about creating a higher value economy or how we could grow the economy, how we could grow incomes. Nothing from them about it. But we did hear about that in the budget, because that is what the budget is going to help to deliver for New Zealand. This is a positive and pragmatic budget. We're looking at the programs that work, and we're making sure that they continue. A program I am very proud of is the Apprenticeship Boost program. After the global financial crisis, what did we see happen with apprenticeships under the last National government? We saw them reducing the number of people in apprenticeships. If we want to know why we've got critical skill shortages in areas like building and construction now, it was because of the underinvestment of the last government. We will not allow those mistakes to be repeated. Apprenticeship Boost is keeping our apprentices in work, and it is resulting in more people taking up apprenticeships. That is going to be good for our future as a country. And we are focused on making sure that we are increasing the opportunities for our exporters. This government doesn't just talk a big game when it comes to international trade, we actually deliver. And if you look at the trade agreement signed by this government versus the trade agreement signed by that government, the last government, I will back this government every day of the week. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, when we go abroad, we're there to talk up New Zealand, not talk New Zealand down. We don't go around the world complaining Kiwi businesses are too soft. We go around the world promoting Kiwi businesses because we're backing Kiwi businesses to create jobs and to help New Zealanders to get ahead. Mr. Speaker, we know that there are serious issues facing New Zealand. And what have we heard from the opposition about what they might do and what their plans are? Well, so far, the biggest issue that seems to be confronting the National Party is that they think that they should start issuing tax receipts for New Zealanders. Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope the National Party kept their receipt the last time they traded in their leader, because I think there's a few backbenchers who are going to be looking for a refund. Because after that woeful contribution that we just heard, I can tell Nicola Willis is out of the House already because she's back in the boardrooms around Auckland touting her future prospects. Mr. Speaker, the coalition of cuts opposite has no positive and optimistic plan for the future of New Zealand. And we know what would happen under a national government. They haven't really said much, but we can read it in the tea leaves and we can read it in their statement. Apprenticeship boost gone. Fees free for those future workers like our future teachers, nurses, doctors. That would be gone under National. Progress on climate change gone. Winter energy payments finished. Free and healthy school lunches gone under National. School funding reduced. And as for workers' pay and conditions, we know that they would be on the chopping block as well. Money for rail, state houses, money for rail chopped, state houses sold off because that's what they did last time. The 10 days of sick leave introduced under this government back on the chopping block under a national government. And I tell you, there's one thing New Zealanders can be certain of. Under a National Act government, one of the things that is absolutely clear, both of those parties want to cut superannuation. They have both made it clear that they have plans to reduce eligibility for superannuation in New Zealand. They are united on that. The only question is how deep are they going to cut it? And given the ACT Party, for all of their faults, at least they have a plan, which is more than the National Party have. So the team without a plan or the team with a plan, it's probably the ACT Party's plan that's going to hold sway. And New Zealanders should be very, very worried about that. Because the only thing that the ACT Party want to do, if David Seymour was Minister of Finance, which he seems to be lining up for under a government, he's nodding his head, the only thing that David Seymour wants to do is cut, cut and cut. That is what a National Act government would stand for. But Mr. Speaker, enough about them. Let's finish on a positive note. And that is, I want to thank Grant Robertson for the work that he has done to support Kiwi families, to support Kiwi businesses. We know that the global economic conditions that we have faced in this government have been tough. We know that there have been some tough choices in this budget, and we know that Grant Robertson has he always has, over the last 6 budgets, he has handled those well. He has given us a balanced approach to managing the New Zealand economy, one that is delivering for New Zealanders. one that will help to create a brighter future for New Zealand, not by ignoring the future, but by making sure that we are investing in it. This is a budget for the times. It is a no-frills budget that's delivering for New Zealanders. Well done, Grant Robertson. I am proud of the budget that you have delivered.
Mr. Speaker.
And just confirming that the question now is that the amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. I call David Seymour.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly rise in support of that question, and I just want to give a tip to the Labor backbenchers. You could see in a Stalin-esque way they weren't sure when to stop clapping. Let me clue them in. October 14 is when the show stops after that performance by your excuse for a Prime Minister, Labor Party. I say to that Prime Minister, it's quite extraordinary how he forgets who he is and who's been in government for the last 6 years. There was a period there where he said, I want New Zealand where people can get ahead, where it's fair, where everyone has dignity. Well, actually, we all want that. The difference is Chris Hipkins is the one who's been in government with Grant Robertson for the last 6 years, creating the problems that we have today. And the Labor Party likes to say, why can't everyone just be positive? We're doing our best. It's a good job. Well, maybe he should have a look at what New Zealanders are saying. Since June last year, every single reputable public opinion poll has the majority of New Zealanders saying this country is going in the wrong direction. And the latest Curia poll by 2 to 1. So when this government from Labor says, let's be positive, what they're saying is that we have never been more out of touch as a Labor government, and that is why October 14 is Judgment Day and October 15 will be Retirement Day for all of those Labor backbenchers who don't know when to clap. Mr. Speaker, this budget should be named the blowout budget. Because I really, just for a moment, I almost believed Grant Robertson when he said he was going to be responsible and get spending under control. I thought Grant Robertson will at least try, after he said he was going to spend $4 billion, at least try and be a little bit responsible so that we can get inflation under control, so that mortgage rates can come down, so that life can be more affordable. Surely Grant Robertson will try and be a little bit more responsible. But oh no, this is a reckless, irresponsible, blowout budget with $7.5 billion worth of deficit spending next year that will put all of this government's attempts to help with the cost of living in the shade. Mr. Speaker, the ACT Party predicts that with this massive blowout of borrowed money, mortgage rates will hit 10% next year on the floating rate. And that's going to put pressure not just on people that have mortgages, but on businesses and people that buy from them, on tenants who rent off landlords that also have mortgages. Adrian Orr will have been saying things in his office at the Reserve Bank that I'm not allowed to say in this House when he realised how irresponsible Grant Robertson is with his spending. And the problem with Grant Robertson is that he just doesn't listen even to Chris Hipkins, because Chris Hipkins knows the problem. He said it isn't right for people to be tightening their belts if the government won't do the same. Well, we're now going to see people up and down this country tightening their belts, trying to make their household budgets balance, because Grant Robertson can't tighten his, and his deficit spending is going to shoot inflation and mortgage rates through the roof. And he'll come back and say, oh, but the Treasury says inflation will go down. This is the same Treasury that 2 years ago said inflation would be 1.8%. This is the same Treasury that said last year it would be 5.2%. It's now 6.7%. So when Treasury says that inflation next year will be 6.3%, it's going to be higher. And when they say the official cash rate is going to be 5.5% or 6%, it's going to be higher. And this is all the symptom of a government that has run out of excuses. Excuses are the one thing that Grant Robertson has more than anything of. He's got even more excuses than he's got deficit dollars to spend. You see, Mr. Speaker, Grant Robertson blamed COVID. Well, I'm sorry, it's officially over. The world moved on over a year ago now. And then he blamed Vladimir Putin. And I can understand that as a political tactic because he's an extremely bad man. But the facts are the oil price is now lower than it was before Putin started his war. So that excuse is gone. And then, perhaps most shamefully, he tried to use the victims of the floods and cyclones as an excuse for his endless addiction to spending other people's money. Well, I'm sorry, but in this budget, there's $7 billion of borrowing and only $1 billion of extra spending for the cyclone and the floods. In fact, not even that, about $900 million of new spending to help people who in many cases have lost everything and still have no certainty about what that rebuild will look like. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that's running out of other people's money, it's running out of excuses, it's running out of options, and it's going to do a huge amount of damage in the process. Mr. Speaker, one day people will write the history of Grant Robertson, and he's no Caesar. What they will write is he came, he borrowed, he bankrupted all of us. That's what Grant Robertson will be remembered for. And, Mr. Speaker, there is reasons why people think that this country is going in the wrong direction by a ratio of 2 to 1. And the reasons are all about us. Mr. Speaker, I apologise to many people in the country, but I'm an Aucklander. I watch the news in my city, and every day it's like a competition for a more grotesque crime. We saw it just yesterday. Somebody brutally beaten on Quay Street outside the ports of Auckland, where the ships dock and tourists have their entree to our country. Disgraceful. A day before that, a 15-year-old teenage girl shot in a road rage incident on an Auckland motorway. You can't make this stuff up. Sometimes I wonder if we're talking about Mangere or Manukau or Mount Albert or Mogadishu when we hear the crime in our country. And yet what is there in this budget from this Labor government to make the streets safer? It's almost as though it's not happening. And they wonder why they're saying, be positive, everybody. And yet the people look at them and ask, what planet is this Labor government on? Planet out of touch is the planet that they're on. What about healthcare? And this is the problem with Labor's spending addiction. I wouldn't mind the fact that they're spending 61% more this year than they were spending 5 years ago when they came into government. I wouldn't mind the fact that their total spending will be up 80% in 6 years. I wouldn't mind the fact that their total, I wouldn't mind the fact that they have borrowed over $100 billion in 5 years. I wouldn't mind the fact that they're taxing more than ever if only they were getting some results. But where are those results? Well, we've just heard it's not in making the streets safer. Victimisation is up in nearly every category. And think about what that means for New Zealanders, sir. Think about people who I regard as some of the greatest New Zealanders who work long hours for little pay in dairies and convenience stores. They often have their family living behind or above their store. They're there after hours when it's dark, and they don't know where the next robbery or raid's going to hit. They don't know if it's going to be their place. They don't know if any support will come, so they're starting to fight back. That's what the lawlessness looks like. It looks like we are seeing vigilante justice. The other day in Auckland, I saw a group of people who actually locked a criminal inside their liquor store because the government has given up on locking them into prisons. That's what happens when the government gives up upholding the law, Mr. Speaker. People take the law into their own hands. But what about health? You know, 68% increase in healthcare expenditure in 5 years. That's the basic facts. $18 billion in 2017, $28 billion now. And this is post-COVID, Mr. Speaker. We can't blame everything on COVID, remember. That's the new rule for this debate. We don't want to hear Labor blaming something that happened 2 years ago. You know, they used to blame the previous government. They're always blaming something that happened that's no longer relevant. But $18 billion 5 years ago, now $28 billion in healthcare expenditure, a 68% increase in expenditure on healthcare. Now, Mr Speaker, if you were the Minister of Health in 2017 and someone said, we're going to give you a 68% increase in budget in 5 years, another $10 billion to play with, do you think maybe you could get the hospital waiting list a little shorter? Do you think you could get some more people to want to be GPs? Do you think you could get nurses happy in the workplace again? I mean, with just $10 billion a year, would that do it? And 68% increase in expenditure. I think any sane Minister of Health would say, oh yes, I think that will be enough. Well, they got the $10 billion a year, they got the 68% increase in expenditure, and what did they do? They decided to blow up the healthcare system and restructure it in the middle of a pandemic. They decided to rebuild a healthcare system around the ideology of identity politics instead of the practicality of getting the operations done and the patients seen and the workforce happy in their jobs again. And the result of that, Mr Speaker, is a 68% increase in healthcare expenditure, and nobody is happy. And what about education, Mr Speaker? Well, sadly, it's a similar story. We've seen the education budget go from $14 billion to $18 billion, a 38% increase in healthcare expenditure, and yet we have fewer kids going to school and learning less when they do. Once again, we have a government that has put the ideology of identity politics well ahead of the practicality of transferring valuable academic knowledge to the next generation. Now, Mr Speaker, it might surprise you to know, but I'm a bit of an old lefty when it comes to these things. I simply believe that people in this society, or any free and fair society around the world, should have a place where their kids can go, where they will be safe from bullying and violence, where an adult they regard as respected and knowledgeable will transfer valuable academic knowledge that will equip them to navigate their future. That's what I believe. That's what the ACT Party believes. It's one of the reasons the ACT Party was founded out of Labor. And yet, where is the Labor Party on this question? They don't even know how many kids went to school. And when they get there, they're filled with ideological gobbledygook, anything but the facts of life and academia and reading and writing and arithmetic that will actually get them able to navigate the 21st century. In fact, Mr Speaker, it's so bad that in the last 20 years we have been overtaken by Russia at 10-year-old reading scores. Just think about that for a moment, Mr Speaker. Children growing up under a corrupt, megalomaniacal dictator called Vladimir Putin are getting better reading lessons than children growing up under John Key and Jacinda Ardern. That is how bad things are in education, and yet, Mr Speaker, we do not have a commitment from this government and this budget to actually get back to teaching kids valuable academic knowledge without the ideological gobbledygook. In fact, we've got a commitment to more ideological gobbledygook, and the results for those kids that don't get the valuable academic knowledge they need for their future are absolutely devastating. And then there's the cost of living, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, people don't like to talk about the cost of living because they're embarrassed that they work hard and they often lack the dignity to be able to make ends meet each week. And people in that circumstance, they still tell me things occasionally. They say, you know what, my front two tyres failed the warrant. It's $200 a corner. Now I've got to balance my household budget for the next 12 weeks, the next 6 paid days, till I get back on an even keel, and I hope nothing happens like that again. And then there's people who are worried about the uncertainty. A young couple who bought a small house together when they had children have now decided that they've saved and paid off enough of their mortgage, they've got some equity. They're thinking about buying a bigger house that has a bedroom for each of their kids. And they're thinking maybe at a stretch they could keep their older, smaller unit and maybe use that as an investment for their retirement. Do you think they're going to be doing that now after this reckless and irresponsible inflationary budget that will push up mortgage rates, when they've got a Labor Party that's now going to campaign on introducing capital taxes that will whack them if their investment works out? Of course they're not. And then you hear from people in small business, restaurateurs, who say, all our prices are up. We can't afford to pay our staff anymore. They can't afford to drive to work. I've been slipping them petrol vouchers under the table so that they can afford to get into work and do the job to keep my business running, where if I raise my prices anymore, I lose my customers. That is the inflationary cost of living crisis. That is really a productivity crisis that has left New Zealanders by 2 to 1 saying this country is going in the wrong direction. But, Mr. Speaker, there is actually an alternative. And it doesn't come from the National Party. It doesn't come from telling people that if you vote for us, we will send you a tax receipt in the mail, like it's 1997, to tell you how much you have been paying in tax. People already know they're paying too much tax, and the ACT Party is proud that we have published a fully costed alternative budget that would cut out government waste, invest in the areas that matter, and get this country flying again. Mr. Speaker, this alternative budget reduces expenditure by $38 billion over 4 years. And we do that without touching a single frontline service. Not one cop, not one teacher, not one nurse, not one doctor. In fact, as I come to, we will pay some of them even more. And how do we do that, Mr. Speaker? Well, it's pretty simple. We're going to reduce expenditure by $8 billion a year, but we're doing that in the context of a government that has increased its expenditure by $49 billion. We are offering to take about $1.05 of this government's extra spending and give it back to you in tax cuts. Because I just so happen to believe that a government as wasteful as this one could spend $1 less than $5 and give it back to the people who are struggling at home. That's what our alternative budget does. But actually it doesn't give all of that extra dollar back. It invests some of it in critical areas. You see, Mr. Speaker, there's some areas where the government doesn't spend enough. It's too hard to get into a GP. We don't have enough of them. Young graduates aren't choosing the GP specialisation. We have GPs giving up and retiring or not working the full week. We have GPs moving to Australia where they get paid more. And as a result of that, the average Aussie shares their GP with 574 other Australians. The average Kiwi shares their GP with 820 other Kiwis. So if you wonder why it's hard to get in, we don't have enough of them. And that's why the ACT Party would increase GP capitation fees by 13%, so it's more attractive to be a GP, so fewer will quit, more will train, fewer will leave, and more will come to be GPs in this country, and you might have a chance of actually getting seen. And yes, that will save money throughout the secondary and tertiary healthcare systems. Mr. Speaker, in this country, we have taken defence for granted for far too long. We don't live in Helen Clark's benign strategic environment, and that's why ACT's alternative budget would increase defence expenditure to 2% of GDP so that we can play our part and pull our weight in a fully interoperable ANZAC Defence Force to send a credible message to the rest of the world to back out of the South Pacific. Mr. Speaker, the biggest public policy failure in the last 30 years has been the failure to fund the infrastructure, to build the homes so that the next generation can truly feel like they have a place in this country, not Australia. Unlike our Prime Minister, who celebrates New Zealanders being able to move to Aussie and get a passport in another country. Mr. Speaker, this alternative budget would take $1.2 billion a year and give it to councils to fund the infrastructure so the next generation can build their homes. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to that almost, how do we even describe it? You know what the streets of Auckland are like? It's like that scene in The Lion King when Simba returns and the hyenas are running it. We've got to get serious about justice. We've got to stop the tag and release policy where youth offenders just go in and out and in and out of prison. We need to start locking people up who have no other option and rehabilitating them and not letting them out till they do. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, in ACT's alternative budget, we take corrections for youth out of Oranga Tamariki, put them into corrections, and put some of these youth offenders, perhaps for the first time in their life, in a place where they have the mental health support, the physical safety, the nutrition and the education But we also make it clear that they've done wrong and they can't leave until they've been rehabilitated. Mr. Speaker, we do the same thing for adult prisons. Labor's experiment of letting 2,000 or 3,000 people out of prison to see what happens to crime is complete. The jury is in. New Zealand becomes lawless. It's not safe for many people to go about their lives. We will end that experiment and fund the imprisonment rates that we had in 2017, then start rehabilitating people, not letting them out to see how much crime there is. Mr. Speaker, with all of that, we are able to cut taxes. So someone, say a nurse on 70 grand, would keep another $2,300 a year. That is what a responsible budget would look like. Back in surplus, cutting waste, funding the basics, and cutting taxes where possible. Mr. Speaker, there is a real choice for New Zealand. And it's not between Chris and Chris, because it turns out that's not much of a choice at all. The real choice is one of real change, to give your party vote to the ACT Party and choose a future for New Zealand where we truly become a prosperous first world nation and an island paradise, which has always been New Zealand's dream and ACT's vision for our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Marama Davidson.
All right, the boys have had a little bit of a go. Mr. Speaker, the Green Party will vote to pass this budget. Mr. Speaker, it includes some really important steps that will make a huge difference to people's lives. And as a result of this budget, people are going to find it so much easier to get on a bus or train. Thousands of families won't be forced to pay through the roof to get their tamariki into early childhood education. And I do send a mihi to Minister Taneti and understand how much of a difference that is going to make for so many people. I know that the ECE sector are going to be particularly happy about that. And households will get the help they need to make their homes warmer and healthier and lower their power bills. We're stoked that this budget, that delivers a number of policies the Green Party has campaigned on for over 10 years. 9 years ago, we promised to extend the 20 hours ECE subsidy to cover 2-year-olds, and this has happened. Greens have campaigned for 10 years to deliver more affordable public transport, and now in government, this is a reality. Yay. Thank you, my colleagues. Warmer Kiwi homes is also a long-standing Green commitment that dates back to 2009, when previous Green Party co-leader Jeanette Fitzsimons won an agreement from the government to insulate up to 180,000 homes. It was only when we got into government in 2017 that we could scale this up to really make a difference. The key message from this budget is that if Labor wants to keep working with us, we have plenty more ideas we can share. The budget also builds on the foundations the Green Party has laid out over the last 4 years to take climate action in every part of Aotearoa, with another $1.4 billion towards cutting climate pollution. This is huge. Yeah, please, paki mai. This is huge. And it is on top of a $2.9 billion package at Budget 22 and $865 million before that. But we absolutely need so much more. Overnight, some of the world's leading scientists have confirmed that globally we are now more likely than not to warm the planet by more than 1.5 degrees. This is the globally agreed limit for what we can safely deal with. Every fraction of a single degree matters. A 1.6 degree world is a lot less bad than a 1.7 degree world, but we simply cannot find out what 2 degrees of warming looks like, and that is up to all of us together. Every single tonne of climate pollution that is stopped matters. We are in a climate emergency, and it is time for everyone to act like it. When I look across this budget, I am struck not just by the impact the Green Party has had on people's lives, but by the breadth of issues on which we are making a difference. Is it enough? Not even close. So let me be clear. While we are pleased with large parts of this budget, we know it still falls a long way short of what is needed. There is so much more that we could have done in this budget now, not future ones, but now. This was the budget that could have reduced the outrageous and immoral level of income and wealth inequality we have in this country. It could have been the budget that confronted climate change with the urgency and the scale that it demands. A budget that made sure everyone in Aotearoa has what they need to have kai on the table, a safe place to call home and live a good life. A budget that invested in action to protect our rivers, land, forests, beaches and oceans. A budget that can make sure that secondary teachers' pay is in line with the rising cost of living. Mr. Speaker, a budget that upholds tiriti justice, returning resources directly back to iwi and hapu, so tangata whenua can finally have the autonomy and authority over our whenua and well-being that we were promised. And Mr. Speaker, it could have been a budget that taxed the mega-rich to pay for it. Everything we need to make life better for people in Aotearoa exists. What's missing is the political willpower to use it. Budgets are a political choice, Mr. Speaker. These choices are meant to reflect the underlying values of the government of the day. The reason we have a budget is to allocate resources where they are needed so we can build the kind of communities and society that are good for all people to live in, to create the conditions we need to support each other, to care for native wildlife, to cut climate pollution, and to make sure the richest few contribute more to cover the good things we all need. The budget is one of the best chances the government has to make clear to the people why it is in power and what it wants to do. Today's budget will be talked about at length in the media, in our workplaces, around the dinner table and amongst friends. In every case, it should be judged on the difference it will make to people's lives. For many people, the struggle to put food on the table, to pay the bills, is the concern that rises above all others. It's the worry that keeps people up at night and the first thought people have when they wake up in the morning, and understandably so. Inflation hits lower income families the hardest, those whānau who spend the majority of their income covering the essentials like food and rent. One of the major drivers of inflation is corporate greed. Massive companies have cynically used global crises to push up their profits, and with it, they have brought us more expensive groceries, higher energy bills. So while corporations like banks and supermarkets juice their profits, thousands of people are forced to struggle to get by, to put kai on the table, to pay the bills and to heat their homes. As I stand here, Mr. Speaker, I feel the huge responsibility that is upon me and the Green Party to rewrite the rules around care, contribution and connection. Nurses and teachers being paid what they deserve, warm, affordable homes, thriving native wildlife, resilient communities with places for people to connect, fast, reliable buses and trains, clean air to breathe. When thousands of our friends, our neighbours and our whānau cannot afford to make ends meet, when we are facing more extreme weather superpowered by a fossil fuel industry whose political power has caused climate change, then we have a fundamental choice to make. We cannot allow the very rich to get even richer while everyone else struggles to get by. We can collect the resources we need from those most able to pay and use that money to improve the lives of millions of people who have unjustifiably been missing out for generations. Mr. Speaker, successive governments have repeatedly denied their ability to fix major problems. They tell us their hands are tied. Balancing the budget has become an end in itself. So much so that it seems to be higher up the list of priorities of most political parties than actually helping people put kai on the table. The time to change that is right now. It's simply not good enough for politicians to continue to rely on tired and disproven arguments about restraining spending. Aotearoa is a wealthy country. We have what we need. There are no excuses for children going hungry. Putting low spending to GDP ratio ahead of meeting the needs of everyone in our beautiful whenua is deeply flawed and economic nonsense. And worst of all, it shows a lack of vision for building an inclusive Aotearoa that does work for everyone. Ending poverty, ensuring everyone has a home, a high-quality health and education system, protecting our environment. Mr. Speaker, as with any budget, the only constraints a government faces are those it places on itself. Right now, the biggest constraint of all is the money available and the tools we are not using to access it. And this isn't because the money's not there, it's because government after government has actively decided not to use it. It is simple. We must change budget and tax rules so we can pay for the things that really matter to us. The money we need to support each other is already there. Some people have way more than enough and others have been suffering through successive government rules. There is no economic reason for these self-imposed revenue constraints. It's a political choice, that's it. And it's a choice that comes with a cost. The rich get richer as they accumulate more and more unearned tax-free wealth, while the rest of us struggle to get by, waiting for a bus that never comes, waiting for care from an overworked nurse, or waiting for a decent, affordable home. So, if people want an answer to the question of why there is not more in this budget to pay for the things we need, then look no further than the ongoing failure to fix the tax system. Cabinet has the tools it needs. It just needs more Green MPs to share our homework a lot more. At a time, oh, you're so cute, my colleagues, I love it. At a time of climate crisis, a time of massive wealth and income inequality, now is the time to completely change how we do things. Through political choice, wealth in this country is severely, severely out of balance. Right now, a tiny group of 311 people hold in their hands more wealth than nearly half of the entire population altogether. So this is a mega rich group of families with a combined wealth of $85 billion, and yet they pay less than half the effective tax rate of a nurse. To put this into context, government spending in 2022 on health, education and welfare, including superannuation, Mr. Speaker, was around $90 billion, only just above the combined wealth of these mere 311 individuals. These individuals have, on average, a wealth of $276 million each. $276 million each. The average house price in Aotearoa is $1 million, say. So that means 311 people own the equivalent of 276 houses each. That is immoral and unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, do you know how long it would take for the average nurse to earn that amount of money? 3,680 years. Talk to us about who works hard for their money. If that was the only definition, all nurses would be billionaires. To stand by in the face of such a grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is stupid. Not only is it so obviously unfair, it is also counterproductive. It is starving our health, education, transport and social services. Make no mistake, we got here by political choices. A choice to favour a tiny group of people at the top of expense and at the expense of the rest of us. Mr. Speaker, that there are 311 people with enough money in their bank accounts or tied up in their tax-free property portfolios to lift every single family out of this country, out of poverty. Overnight, we could all make this decision. I'm shocked that the rich are triggered. Did not expect that. So this budget did not change those rules. It's politicians who need to be triggered. We made these rules and we can change them, and the rest of you aren't moving. This House watches over one of the most egregious concentrations of wealth that I can think of. We must muster the collective political courage to do something about it. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Green Party is up to it. We're up for it. The time is now to be bold. We need urgent action to cut climate pollution and build resilient communities where everyone has what they need to thrive, not just a few. We want to make sure everyone has what they need to have kai on the table, a safe place to call home and live a good life, not just a struggling, surviving one, an actual decent life. We need to stop large corporations trashing our environment. We need to restore our rivers, our oceans, our forests and wildlife to health, to order for the benefit of everyone, and we need to allocate enough resources in our budgets to do these things. Yes, Debbie Ngāre Wapeka, including our beautiful moana and seabeds. The only way we can do that is by rewriting the rules to make sure the richest few people in Aotearoa provide more to cover the things we all collectively value. Ko tēnei te wā. Ko tai te wā. Mr. Speaker, today's budget makes it clear. If people want a government that will build an Aotearoa that works for everyone and asks the most privileged members of our community to chip in to make it happen, then we need more Green MPs to influence the direction of the next government. Let me be upfront about what needs to be put on the table and pushed for in any post-negotiations. A tax on the richest few that will raise money we can use to build a climate-friendly, wiser and more just, prepared Aotearoa that we can all be proud of. An Aotearoa where everyone has a warm, affordable place to call home and kai on the table. Where housing is treated as a human right and not just a get-rich scheme for the already wealthy. Where people have the choice to walk or cycle or get on fast, frequent, affordable buses or trains to meet their friends, to get to the shops, to go to school, to get to the park. Where everyone has access to healthcare they need, whenever they need it, wherever they need it, and where our nurses and teachers are all paid what they deserve. Where all of our students can succeed without having to skip meals to make ends meet, like boosting student allowances to livable levels and making them available to all. Where we have restored our awa, our moana, our ngahere and our wildlife to health for the benefit of everyone. Where te tiriti and mana Maori motuhake is honoured and embedded in everything we do and every decision we make. Where land is rightfully returned to tangata whenua so that we may have tino rangatiratanga over our whenua and resources. Mr. Speaker, I cannot say how the world will look for our mokopuna and mokopuna to come. But what I do know is that it will reflect the decisions we make today. The time is now to get those decisions right. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Mr. Speaker.
Rārari Waititi.
Tēnā koe te pika otira, tēnā tātou e te whare. Well, it is yet another budget year where we all wait with bated breath to see who got the lollies from the lolly scramble. 3 years, Mr. Speaker, of so-called well-being budget, and the well-being of our people here in Aotearoa couldn't be worse off. Let me start by saying that if we brought too much into the framing of cost of living crisis, so carefully orchestrated by my mates here on the right, the fact of the matter is we have been living in poverty for a long, long time. Tangata whenua have been relegated as paupers on their own whenua, and it's getting worse day by day. It's not until the wealthy are struggling to maintain their lifestyles that this House suddenly deems we have a cost of living crisis. It is a privilege to even discuss a cost of living crisis. Mr. Speaker, tangata whenua have never been afforded the privilege of experiencing a cost of living crisis because they are still bearing the brunt of the cost of poverty. Poverty orchestrated by and reinforced by the very parties that sit beside me and in front of me. This budget chooses to prioritise the well-being of the rich over the well-being of the poor by ignoring the big elephant in the room, wealth tax. Now, usually we will get up in this speech and do the courteous thing by thanking the Minister of Finance and thanking the government for their work and being grateful for what we have been given. You know, nobody likes an ungrateful person, particularly an ungrateful native who has just been given some extra bucks. But I'm not going to do that today because it's not enough, that it will never be enough until this government and successive governments in turn meet their contractual obligations under the Tiriti o Waitangi. Until such time as the Tiriti-centric Aotearoa is in full operation, reflected not only in the equal share of power and resource and in the return of our whenua, we will never be happy with any budget that any government proposes. So instead, today, Mr. Speaker, for the slight increase to Māori we see in this year's budget, I pay tribute to the fierce advocates who made it happen. Mere peka rau kawa tate, the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency, tēnā koutou. Hereweni prata, te matatini, ngā kapa katoa te motu, tēnā koutou. And I just want to make reference and remind my Māori Labour caucus colleagues, thank you for going into the Māori Party manifesto, because it's there on page 17, allocate $19 million to Te Matatini. That comes in here. Now we need you to go to page, or you might as well do 1 to 20, and make sure that we get all of what our people deserve. We are proud to have fought alongside you and delivered the largest ever increase in funding for Te Matatini. But we must ask, what happens after 2 years? Why isn't this baseline annual funding? Every year successive governments put forward a budget that bamboozles the hell out of this nation, bamboozles everyone into confusion and submission. Governments throw a few $1 million to Māori kaupapa to keep the natives quiet, throw a few more millions to what is said to be Māori money, knowing full well it goes into a universal bucket. The intentional bamboozling leads Māori to believe they are climbing up the ladder, when in fact the gap is growing wider and wider. Governments know all too well that their budgets for Māori don't even scratch the sides of equity and equality. The small crumbs that are thrown our way is only playing bare minimum catch-ups for over 180 years worth of theft and oppression. Mr. Speaker, this is why we are calling this budget for the rich. The Sheriff of Nottingham budget. Tax the poor and give to the rich. Mr. Speaker, through the conditioning of colonisation, us natives are expected time and time again to be grateful, to smile and nod for the hands that feed us, for the extra crumbs we receive. The narrative we will no longer accept, nor will we tolerate. Prior to 1840, 100% of these lands belonged to Māori. 100% of the resource and power belonged to Māori. Today we have less than 5% of our lands. Today this government offers 0.47% of the entire budget. And you want us to be grateful. The epitome of our saying, kei runga te kōrero, kei raro te rahurahu. Not only have you consistently failed to uphold your obligation under the contract of the Tiriti o Waitangi, you have consistently left your own people behind. But let me move on to our solutions. Mr. Speaker, Te Pāti Māori envisions the promise of an Aotearoa hou. An Aotearoa hou that makes you feel like you would when you come onto our marae. We will welcome you. We will feed you. We will house you. We will connect you. We will educate you. We will care for you. We will heal you. We will love you. Today, 1 in 5 tamariki Māori are living in poverty. This means that their whānau can't afford a safe home, essentials like regular healthy food, doctor's visits, or to pay their power bills. Food prices have gone up 12% in the last year, the biggest annual increase since 1989. Poverty on steroids. While there are many things that can be done, the most important is ensuring people have more money. Our Aotearoa hou will look like everyone having the dignity to be able to put good, healthy kai on the table, to feed their babies and their whānau. Our Aotearoa hou will look like higher incomes, ensuring annual increase in the minimum wage to keep up with the living wage rate, removing sanctions and lifting benefits in line with inflation, extending the Working for Families tax credit to all whānau, removing GST off kai and regulate price hikes from the supermarket duopoly. Over 60,000 Maori are homeless because they can't afford houses. Tangata whenua should never be homeless in their own homeland. Yet government knows there are over 191,000 empty homes. That's three times the supply to meet the demand. And we've spent more than $4 billion a year on housing subsidies, and we're not getting better outcomes. Aotearoa hou looks like every whānau in Aotearoa having a warm, secure and affordable home. Not just a house, but a home. Our Aotearoa hou looks like putting a 2% tax on these empty homes. We have a broken tax system in this country, which has fueled extreme wealth inequity that is only getting worse. The richest 2% own 50% of the wealth in this country. Ordinary people and poor communities are subsidising the lifestyle of the rich, while the average person in Aotearoa is paying 2.2%. In tax, the wealthy are only paying 9.4%. Estimates show that $7 billion per year is being stolen from Aotearoa taxpayers in tax evasion and tax avoidance, enabled by a tax system that allows the rich to evade tax, further placing the burden on wage and salary earners. Our Aotearoa hou looks like shifting the tax burden from the poor to the rich. Looks like a capital gains tax that, if implemented in 2017, we would have made $200 billion in tax revenue. Just think about that for a moment. $200 billion. That is nearly 2 times the annual amount of revenue the Crown currently receives. Just think about what that could mean for improving the oranga of our people in an Aotearoa hou. In their recent pre-budget announcement, the government celebrated that since they came into power in 2017, they have invested $4.7 billion in the defence budget, more than double what the previous national government spent. Instead of investing in what matters, the oranga of our people and the oranga of our whenua, this government is investing in weapons of war to prop up a global military-industrial complex and imperial power games of Washington, London, Ottawa and Canberra. Our Aotearoa hou looks like that the $4.7 billion spent on defence could have been spent on ensuring everyone can afford the doctor and the dentist visits, on investing into marae and papakainga and protecting them from flooding and storms, shifting that $4.7 billion to housing the homeless, lifting incomes, enabling people to put kai on the table and pay their power bills. Our Aotearoa hou will have a transformative defence and foreign affairs policy for Aotearoa, which asserts the mana Maori motuhake and tino rangatiratanga of tangata whenua. And Aotearoa hou looks like continuing to fund a defence force in the Pacific for te moana nui a kiwa. With the extreme weather events of the last few weeks, we've seen just how important it is that our defence force is focused on responding to threats to our own people. And Aotearoa hou is a military-neutral Aotearoa. Climate change is one of the greatest challenges Aotearoa and Te Ao Māori will ever face. This government continues to allow the granting of permits to drill, block offers on petroleum gas exploration permits and offshore seabed mining. The Labour climate scorecard is poor. As Aotearoa lives through the worst effects of climate change we have ever seen, this budget delivers nothing but crumbs. We cannot overcome this crisis through electric cars alone. There is nothing in this budget to support the transition in our biggest polluting industry, agriculture. Where is the funding to support a transition into regenerative and organic farming? And Aotearoa hou looks like future-proofing our communities protecting our pepeha, protecting the whakapapa of Papatuanuku. Our Aotearoa hou looks like whānau being able to swim and drink from their local awa without being worried about getting sick. Gather kaimoana from their local pātaka without worry and not having to deal with flooding week after week. An Aotearoa hou looks like taking climate change seriously. It means investing in clean energy and restoring our taiao, protecting and preparing communities for climate adaptation, transitioning to regenerative and organic agriculture, banning seabed mining. Thank you, thank you. Our Aotearoa hou is what is needed right now, Mr. Speaker. That's a different Mr. Speaker. The real Mr. Speaker. Please stand up. It is a place that is equal, equitable, fair and just for all. It ensures the protection of the whakapapa of Papatuanuku. It ensures the mana of Te Tiriti o Waitangi at the centre of our country's constitutional transformation, where tangata whenua and tangata tiriti stand united with honour and dignity. Nā reira, come to the gateway of our marae so we can welcome you all home to our Aotearoa hou. Kia ora tātou. Oh, thank you, thank you.
I call the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods.
I move that the debate be now adjourned.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. This debate